Hey everyone, welcome to the video. I'm going to be showing you today how to make a fantastic thatch roof like this cottage behind me using this plumber's hemp. Now this technique was first pioneered in this fantastic book, long out of publication now, Cottage Modelers for Pendon. It's full of fantastic hints and tips and amazing techniques for making various kinds of model finishes. Now I've not seen a video before on how to make a thatch roof using this particular technique. I'm sorry I'm making the camera wobble. So let's dive straight down and I'll show you how I did it.
Now you get a lot of fibre for your money. This hank of hemp costs about $14.99 from Amazon, and it comes in a large strand, looks like plaited hair to start off with. So your first job is to separate all the fibres down into more manageable strands. Now what you're aiming for is something about 25mm wide. So I need to separate it out several times and I'll get quite a few strands to work with. Now the next thing you need to do is get a little box. Ideally you need a box to cut with because it just makes things easier. Now what I've done is marked out a line about 25mm long, and I'm going to cut my strands with a pair of scissors. Now the idea here is that when you cut your strands out, they don't fall onto the table and loosen up. So we'll do several of these and until I've got enough to work with. So I've got a nice pile of strands here. These are all bunched up, and what I've got now is a little pot with some diluted PVA glue. Now once we've got all our strands together and our glue, we're going to paint some neat PVA glue onto the patch of roof that we want to start with. It's always a good idea to start with a reasonable size of roof. So paint neat PVA along the row of the bottom. What I'm going to do is go all the way around the corner. Now with that neat PVA glue, you just dip the ends of your strands in. Now the idea with that is it's going to bond your strands at the ends but not seep all the way to the bottom, so it's a good idea to wipe them on the edge of the tub just to make sure it doesn't go all the way. Now just work your way all the way along this corner, and what I'm going to do now is fan my way around the gable. Now this happens to be a specific type of gable roof. There's lots of different types of gables on thatched cottages, but this is a more regular gable, so we're just going to fan around the end, just making sure we go all the way to the top. Now once we've got that initial row on, I can carry on and do a little bit more on the other side. I'll work backwards and we'll carry on with just one row, making sure we're overlapping the roof line by quite some distance. You can always nudge it with your fingers. So as we get to the end, I'm going to repeat the same thing on the opposite gable. So we come all the way to the end, then paint some neat PVA up along the edge, and then start fanning out some more strips of strands. It's quite a time consuming job this, but it's worth doing. Now once you've got that first row in, we can work our way along and do a second row. So paint on some neat PVA into the part that you want the glue, and then again using the dip technique, dip your strands, or the very ends of your strands, into the glue and glue all the way along. So we get to the gable on the other side, we do the same thing again. Now we're just taking time here, and you don't want to get your strands too wet with glue, so just work your way along slowly. Now with the magic of time lapse, we've completely covered that first end. The glue is still quite wet here, but it's quite nice to touch. We've got a lot of loose strands. And then we'll come around to the other side. We're going to repeat the same process. Just cover the first row with neat PVA and then dip your strands into the watered down PVA and cover the side, working your way over layer by layer. Once you've got them in, you can push the strands up loosely with your thumb. Now unfortunately I didn't film that bit, but basically as you can see, following up the shape of the roof line. Oh yes, I did film it actually, I don't know what I'm talking about. Just with your fingers, loosely pad it into place. You're basically wanting to just push those fibres up so it matches the slope of the roof. It does take a lot of time and patience, but eventually you'll get to an end stage like this. Again, just pushing those fibres up. Now what I wanted to do here was just try out, once it was fully dry, with my electric clippers, just gently and very carefully shaving some of those loose pieces off. It doesn't do a thorough job, but as you can see here, it's starting to get a little bit more smooth. You just got to take your time here, and it's very much experimental. I made sure it was all nice and dry first, so nothing was shifting around, but things did actually move a little bit, and as you can see it's quite clumpy there, so you've just got to be really careful. Now I'm going to put a ridge line in, so the very top of it is going to be some more strands, and I'm going to glue neat PVA all the way across the top. So I've got to the top here with my strands, and before we go too much further we just need to trim it off. So using a combination of scissors and a sharp craft knife, we're just coming right up neatly to the top of the roof. Now as you can see there's still a good 25-30 millimeters of fibres still to go, so we're going to carry on now once we've got that top end trimmed down, and just carry on with our dipped PVA strands. We'll just cover up that last 25-30 millimeters of roof using the same technique again, just overlapping lots and lots of strands until we get to the top. Again, you want to use that same technique of just slowly pushing and kneading them into place until it follows the roof line. Now I've just sped up the process of the glue drying a little here to help me out with a hairdryer, same as I do with a paintbrush. It's still not fully dry, and we can then trim with a knife, again like we did on the other side, until we've got a neat little line. Now we need to create a ridge here, so what I'm doing now is just with the last sort of 5-10 millimeters of roof, I'm just going to lay some more fibres all the way across the top. What we want to do now is just try and get a neat defined edge for the ridge. Now it's going to fold over the top, so it wants to be around, like I say, 5-10 millimeters coming down, and it wants to be doubled up so it folds over the top. So the idea is you will eventually fold these strands over the top of that ridge line. So we're just going to work all the way up to this first chimney, and then I'm going to paint on some more neat PVA glue. Just knock the camera there. I'm going to paint on some more, well, it's not neat PVA, it's more watered down. It's probably about an 80-20 mix. I'm just going to let that soak into the fibres just to stick it down firmly. Once all that's covered, we just carry on and just make sure there's glue soaked into the rest of those fibres. Now what I've got here is a little bit of an error. What I did with the ridge is I managed to cut it too short, so it didn't protrude down onto the rest of the roof long enough. So basically I'm doing a bit of a rescue job here now, but essentially this is the same sort of technique that you should have done to the start. Now what I'm going to do is, just to rescue that ridge, I'm going to paint some more neat PVA, that's very hard to say. I'm going to paint some more neat PVA over that ridge line. So we're just basically ignoring the fact that I've got it wrong and pretending that I haven't, and we're going to glue some more strands over the top. We want to achieve the same sort of result. It wants to come down about 10 millimeters over the ridge line, so we've got a decent ridge effect. Basically it wants to come past, in this instance it wants to come past the line of the chimney. Okay, so we're going to pretend we've started this from scratch, and again we're just going to glue down some neat fibres, and I'm using this set square there to hold it down tightly. Now once I've glued down enough fibres, I'm going to come down the other side and with some neat glue, and I'm using this little technique of holding it down tightly in place with my set square there and pressing the fibres down. This is basically so it doesn't lift off. I'm being a little bit impatient here, so what you really need to do is maybe leave it 24 hours to properly set, but I didn't have the patience to do that, so I'm just using a metal ruler to persuade it to glue down. Again, use the hairdryer just to help speed up the drying process, but again I'd probably recommend leaving it 24 hours to harden properly. I'm going to carry on the other side of the chimney now, the same technique, just gluing those fibres long enough so that they will fold over. And I'm using neat PVA to glue them in place. I'll come round the gable here, which has got a nice little detail. Just want to make sure I've got enough fibres so that it follows that shape round and looks neat enough. It's focusing on my hand, not the fibres here, but basically I'm just painting some more glue on top of it just to make sure it sets in place. Now as we go, I'm persuading the fibres to fold over, and again using a hairdryer to persuade it to glue quicker. Once it has glued, you can then use a ruler and a steel knife. No, I've said that the wrong way around. You can use a steel ruler and a knife to cut a very neat edge to it. Now, lots of different thatch roofs have lots of different types of ridges. Some have ornamental cut shapes and some are just flat. This one in particular is just flat with a slight shape around the base of the chimneys. A lot of the glue has hardened quite a lot. You can see there's some dark patches, but basically what I'm going to do now with the knife is just cut and neaten up those edges off. You can see here I'm just cutting around the base of the chimney just to create a nice little shape. Just use the scalpel as well just to help cut off some of the straggly bits. And again, it's a good idea to use a straight edge ruler to get the shapes right. You can just see there that it's a little bit loose. You wouldn't have that if it was fully dry, but on the other hand, this being slightly wet has helped me to cut it a lot easier. I do the same thing around the base of this chimney here, is just cut a slight shape just where the sort of the base of the chimney falls. Flashing, it's kind of like a bit of flashing around there. Now on the edges you can use a pair of scissors just to help cut through the fibres. It helps to have a very, very sharp pair of scissors, so raid the sewing kit, whatever, hairdressing scissors. It helps to have a dedicated set of scissors really for doing this kind of job. And you can finish off with a knife as well. Always make sure your blade's nice and sharp. Now it's just worth spending quite a bit of time going around the model, shaving off all the loose pieces. What I've already done here just off camera is with a pair of sharp scissors, like I've done on the end of the gables, is just used it against the slope of the roof and just cutting loose fibres down until you get a nice sort of smooth transition all the way down like this one. And what I've got now is this nice funky nail file. I'm going to use that as just a protector against the wall, and holding that against the base of the roof, I'm just going to use a nice sharp scalpel and just very gently trim along the edge of the eaves just to neaten all those up. As I say, the nail file is just there to help protect going all the way through to the wall. You can use a scrap of wood or plastic or whatever. Now here I'm just going to add some flashing to the base of the chimneys. This is basically plastic strip which I'm gluing all the way around the bottom of the chimney stack. I'm sorry about the editing there, but basically what I'm using now is a tiny piece of wire to create the decorative tiebacks for the thatch. Don't know what's happening to my hands here. I'm going to follow the line. I'm so sorry about the editing. I'm going to follow the line of the ridge there. We're going to glue 2 rows of wire to represent it. I think the actual material is hazel. I'm going to represent the hazel tiebacks, and just to create some crisscrossing effects using a very sharp pair of scissors again, which I can't seem to get off my hands. I'm going to super glue those down onto the ends. Just dip the piece of wire into the super glue there, and very carefully I'm going to glue them in a crisscross shape around the base of the chimney there to represent a little bit of decorative tying down. Now again, this is very fiddly and I've used super glue to do this, but we're going to follow along the edge of the ridges, and it helps to have some activator spray here to help it glue down. I'm just using the scalpel here to hold it in place. Now when we get to the gable ends, it follows the curve of that little piece of gable. I'm just going to run some glue around underneath the wire to help stick it down, and we'll follow all the way around the ridge. We want a double row like I've said. Now they stop at the chimney pot, so I'm just going to trim that loose there. And once those are down, I'm just going to paint the wire with some light brown paint. Again, we're just replicating that idea of hazel wood. Use a nice thin brush. I think mine's a number 3 here, we can just see. I'm just going to paint those wires so they don't look like wires. So now that's all done, what we're going to do is start slowly weathering it down. I'm using some Nuln oil here now. This is a Games Workshop product. It's just a dark sort of wash based paint. I think I've actually mixed it with some Agrax Earthshade, to be honest, and we're just going to seriously weather up that thatching so it's looking a lot older. Now this really is up to individual taste. I just wanted to make this roof look a lot older, like the thatching was not freshly laid. Yeah, it's freshly laid, I suppose that's what it is, isn't it? You lay thatch. And just to give it a little bit more age, I'm just washing some diluted green paint in here just to give it a little bit of moss. We can go all the way around, bit of dark green, bit of brown. We're just aging up the edges where the water will run to. Now again, I've just used a little bit of artistic license here because I wanted it to look more aged, and I'm going away all the way around the model, just painting it onto the roof line, the ridge line, where you would expect more moisture to run, and again all the way underneath each of the sort of ridge areas. We're just gently and gradually touching in some shade. I'm using the Agrax Earth shade here again, and we're just going to really weather it up, making it a lot darker. Now once that's all dry, I'm going to dry brush a lighter sort of tan shade just to bring out a bit more detail. Again, it's a dry brush effect. It's really going to bring it back to life again. It's looking a little bit dark. I've got the tone that I want, and now I'm just going to add a lot of dry brushing with, like I say, it's a tan colour that I'm using. We're trying to replicate a little bit more lighter straw. So just make sure your brush, I don't really have to tell you how to use dry brush, but make sure your brush has got not very much paint left on it, and use a large brush in this instance, and just work your way all the way over the roof line. We're just wanting to covering it rather roughly here now, but we're just basically wanting to mute that shading down, and you can just have a lot of fun with it here, going progressively lighter if you wish. Now some considerable time has passed here. We're probably looking at around about 80 to 100 hours of work as I've worked on the rest of the building, putting it into place. And now we're just going to do some final touches. So I'm going to use a Citadel paint here called Xandri Dust, which is a lighter straw coloured paint again, and I'm going to use that same dry brushing technique, but just to dry brush the ridged part a little bit lighter. Now this is a newer part of straw on the roof, so we're wanting to look a little bit lighter. So again, just go all the way over the building, the roof, and just dry brush. Again, it's all down to individual taste and how your original model looks. If your model's a lot more fresh, the straw's a lot more fresh, you want it a lot lighter shade. Again, like I say here, I wanted it to be a bit more weathered, so we've got a lot more darker shades, and we're just dry brushing on some lighter shades. Why am I bashing the camera here? I have no idea. I'm just getting in my own way. I'm just wanting to highlight those edges a little bit more, make them a lot less harsh. I'll switch paint colours here now, using Vallejo Middlestone. Again, dry brushing. It's a little lighter than the previous layer, so we're just building up lighter layers on top of each other. I want it to go a lot lighter than I originally intended. Perhaps my weathering was a little bit too harsh. Covering it up with some lighter shades. This is just across the ridge line where it's a slightly fresher straw. And we can add a little bit of dotting around and about just to lighten up some other areas. As you can see, it's quite an effective and quick way of lightening up the colours. I can do the same on the gables now, just lightening up the stonework, just highlighting those straw edges, as it were. You can be quite heavy-handed here, but just make sure you don't brush off those little details on the ends. We can add a bit more dry brushing to the main body of the roof now, just highlighting some of those areas and masking off some areas that have been a little bit too heavy-handedly shaded. Just add a little bit more detail here. Again, we're just having a bit of fun. We're just having a little bit of fun with our dry brushing and making the whole area look a little bit more realistic. And coming to the rear of the building, I'm going to add a little bit more here. Just keep dry brushing until you're happy with the way it looks. We're on some final stages here now. I'm just going to use some Vallejo pigment. This is Desert Dust, it's quite a light one. Just gently dry brushing over the surface of the roof. I'm going to finish off with now with some slate grey, just to darken off some of those areas a little bit more. It's just to add a little bit shade back into those lighter areas. Now, as you can see, this is the final thing. We're now done. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this progress of a thatched roof using some hemp, and I'm going to leave you to some photographs now. And if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to share it with your friends, like and subscribe, and hit that little bell button so you get notification of every time I post a new video. I hope I'll see you again soon.